expand our imagination.
Justification for being worthless.
Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. Today, another installment of our series, Behind the Ballot, in which we talk to candidates in some of this year's most important races. Today, we are joined by Carly Fiorina, running for Senate in California. She's the former CEO of Hewlett Packard, who now finds herself neck and neck in the polls with incumbent Barbara Boxer. Welcome, Ms. Fiorina. I want to start with the question of stimulus versus the deficit. There's a big conversation here in Washington and all over the country about whether the states need more relief from Washington to get some jobs, to get the economy moving, or whether we really have to move immediately to deficit reduction. I think I know which way you'll end up on that question, but what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Washington could do some things that would help private sector job creation, like cutting key taxes for small businesses. But the stimulus has clearly been a failure in terms of job creation. You know, when Barbara Boxer voted for the stimulus bill, she promised that it would bring help and hope to the people of California, that it would add 400,000 more jobs. In fact, since that time, we've lost an additional 400,000 jobs. Our unemployment rate has risen to 12.4%. That is a failure by any measure. And our debt is now $42,000 for every American man, woman, and child. That's a big problem. We need to be doing the things that create an environment that allow the private sector to grow, particularly small businesses, family-owned businesses, entrepreneurs. That's the lifeblood of our economy. And we need to cut federal spending. That's the only way we're going to get our debt under control, is to grow the economy and to cut spending.
And these measures, cutting spending, cutting taxes, these are your prescriptions for immediate relief, or do voters have to recognize that this is going to take some time to work its way through the economy?
Well, I think it depends on what we're talking about. First of all, some tax cuts would provide immediate relief. For example, the taxation on capital formation is going to rise significantly in January of next year unless we choose to do something differently. Taxing capital formation is a bad idea right now. We could, for example, give something I've proposed, give small business owners a 2-year payroll tax holiday for every unemployed worker that they hired. That would provide some immediate relief. We also need to get after wasteful, abusive government spending immediately. People in Washington talk about it all the time, but they never do anything about it. The truth is, we have become accustomed to a level of incompetence, may I say, and a lack of accountability in Washington, D.C. that we would not accept anywhere else in our nation.
Let me talk to you about spending and cutting spending. One of the things we also hear a lot in campaigns is candidates say, we got to cut out that spending. Then they come to Washington and they maybe tinker around the edges, but they never deal with what a CEO would deal with, which is those big, long-term, problematic costs of long-term entitlements. So what's your plan for that? When we talk about spending reductions, are you talking about going after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those big costs?
Obviously, we will have to look at reforming our entitlement programs. But I will say, as someone who's lived in the real world all my life, I started as a secretary, eventually became the chief executive of Hewlett Packard, and yes, I have managed billions of dollars and cut billions of dollars. You don't start with the hardest thing first. You start with the most obvious things first. And the obvious things are these. Our government has not been reformed in 60 years. We have agencies that are absolutely unaccountable for the money they spend. We have $500 billion almost of well-documented waste and abuse in the federal government, and yet no one asks the basic question, why are we spending that much money? And while Californians are dealing with 12.4% unemployment, federal government employees are growing at 14.5% a year this year and next year.
But in terms of that spending question, you know, voters in some sense need to be educated by campaigns. Do you think that while it may make sense to start with the small things, there are these massive things out there that no one seems to want to talk about? Why is that no one wants to talk about where the real money is in terms of fixing the budget?
Well, I guess I would argue with the premise of your question a little bit. $500 billion is real money. $500 billion, at least 2 bipartisan studies have suggested that there is at least $500 billion worth of waste, fraud, and abuse in every department of the federal government. We would not tolerate that level of incompetence, that lack of accountability anywhere else in our economy, and yet we have just tolerated it. We've let it go on and on and on. $500 billion is real money. It will take real work and real political will to get at that money. I think it's something that people in the private sector do all the time. A family cuts back on its spending when times get tough. A small business cuts back on its spending when times get tough. The American taxpayer has a right to expect people in Washington to start cutting back on their spending, because we are most definitely in tough times.
But if voters are thinking about you, they shouldn't think that that $500 billion is the whole ball of wax. There is a larger problem here that you presumably also want to tackle.
Of course, there's a larger problem. Of course, we need to look at entitlement reform. But you know, I think what Americans, I know what Californians are saying is, before you come back and ask us to sacrifice even more, people here in California are sacrificing plenty. What they don't see is equal sacrifice on the part of elected officials in Washington, D.C. What they don't see is Barbara Boxer fighting on their behalf. She hasn't fought for their jobs. She hasn't fought for their taxes. She's voted for $1 trillion worth of tax increases since she has been a senator, and she hasn't fought to cut spending in any way. So let's start with some things that taxpayers think officials in Washington owe them.
As a former CEO, do you think the Obama administration and Democrats in Congress have kind of frozen business activity? There's a lot of talk about money on the sidelines. Do you think that business owners, CEOs, are just frozen waiting for something to change?
Well, you know, one of the things that I know is that facts are important, and the facts are that American businesses are sitting on a record pile of cash, and they're not doing anything with that cash. So that means that instead of investing it, they're sitting on it. Why? Well, perhaps because our tax rate is the second highest in the world, perhaps because we're one of a very few nations in the world that taxes worldwide profits, perhaps because they see a regulatory and a legal climate that is, at the very least, increasingly uncertain. One of the things I've also proposed, just as an example, is let's give a new business a 5-year tax holiday if they will invest capital and equipment and hire American workers instead of going somewhere else around the globe where they will face a friendlier business climate and a lower tax structure.
Some have suggested the treatment of BP by the administration has led to an unfriendly business climate. Do you think the $20 billion slush fund, as Sharon Angle, the Republican candidate in Nevada, has called it, that has added to this chilling effect?
No, I actually support the $20 billion fund. I think the president did the right thing. I think BP did the right thing in stepping up to that. I think having an independent administrator administer that money is the right thing to do. So I support that. I disagree strenuously with the Obama administration's decision to, in essence, ban offshore drilling for 6 months, and I'm pleased to see that 2 federal courts disagree with them as well. But in terms of the fund, I support it.
Last question. You have been supported by Sarah Palin. You said you share her values. She put out an interesting ad last week talking about Mama Grizzlies and the notion of a movement of mothers. What does that mean to you and to your campaign?
Well, you know, I'm very pleased to have received the endorsements from a wide variety of people, everyone from Sarah Palin to Olympia Snow. In California, from the California Farm Bureau to the New Majority. I think what it means is that women are coming of political age, and women are not single-issue voters. Women like me have a wide variety of views. Some of us, like me, are pro-life, but all of us as women are worried about our children's future. All of us are worried that we're not creating enough jobs. All of us are worried about the level of debt that we're piling on our children and grandchildren, and all of us are worried about an unaccountable, out-of-touch, out-of-control government in Washington, D.C., and that's why I'm running.
Can a pro-life candidate win in California?
I think absolutely. The polls suggest that. I accept that not everyone agrees with me on the sanctity of life. Very few people agree with Barbara Boxer either, I might say, who is very extreme on this topic. She has voted repeatedly against a ban on partial birth abortion. She believes American taxpayers should fund any abortion, anytime, anywhere, for any reason. The majority of Californians don't agree with that view as well. But importantly, the majority of Californians, I think, understand that what's at issue in this election is jobs. What's at issue is out-of-control government spending. What's at issue is whether or not our government is going to listen and work on behalf of the people of California.
All right, Carly Fiorina, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And moving on now, those 10 Russian spies are gone, but the whole episode leaves behind a series of head-scratching questions. To help me through some of them is Eric O'Neill, former FBI undercover operative who helped capture Russian spy Robert Hanssen. Welcome.
Thank you, John.
There seem to be a lot of unanswered questions in this whole episode. So what strikes you, what stands out for you in terms of what's missing? What part of the story are we not hearing?
Well, one thing we can't do is read the complaint and think we have the whole picture. We've just got a snapshot of it. Think of it as the tip of the iceberg. What's most interesting is what the FBI hasn't included, because it's either classified or protected or ways and means that our counterintelligence doesn't want the other side to know. So I'd love to see what the rest of their case is. And I'd be interested to see if maybe they had some time to debrief these spies before this swap happened, which was pretty fast. We could have learned some more about what they were doing.
So what do you want to know? Who they contacted, whether they were successful? What kind of questions do you want to answer?
Absolutely. I want to know who they talked to, who they contacted, who were the Americans that they were supposed to meet with, recruit, and get what we're calling policy information from. What was that policy information? There's got to be more to this story. The Russians didn't take a risk, a political risk, to embed these people here for that many years and the expense of training them just to get information that you could perhaps find on Google.
And they watched them for a good long time here. So what's that like? Just tell us, having been through this. I mean, to watch somebody for that period of time, just let us in on a little bit on what that process is like.
Absolutely. You learn a lot about a person from the inside out. You learn those little intricacies that that people try to hide from the general public. If you imagine what you might do in the privacy of your own house when no one else is around, and it might be a little embarrassing if the FBI, for example, were watching. So you have to take surveillance with a grain of salt. You have to give the person the benefit of the doubt. You have to be somewhat ethical and careful about watching people. But there is sometimes a shock factor, especially when you hear two people who end up being spies talking about what they're doing.
Do you develop sort of shorthands? I mean, this is a long time watching, and in your case, you know, a kind of shorthand way of referring to the subject that you've sort of become quite familiar with them, one-sided as the relationship may be.
Absolutely, and you can have conversations which can be somewhat joking, but at the same time you have to be careful about the fact that you're looking at someone's life, and you're looking at someone's life in a very clandestine way that is unfair in a way that it's one-sided. Now here, of course, they're spies, and so they got what they deserved, but it is difficult to put yourself in the mind of a watcher.
And this is, American people should basically recognize that there are other probably spies out there, the Russian spies, even though relations have warmed a little bit, the Cold War is over. There are probably other operations like this going on. Would that be a safe thing for people to assume? Oh,
absolutely. And we should have always assumed it. I love how so many people are talking about, hey, this is just the Cold War. The Cold War might have ended, but spying has always existed, and it always will. It's the best way for a country to collect information about another country. And you know, one great comment is, while countries might politically be friendly, intelligence services are never friends.
And in terms of the operatives who did all of this watching, as you mentioned, this swap happened pretty quickly. How does it feel if you spent all of this time watching somebody gathering little tiny bits of evidence to then suddenly have them whisked away, handed over, the trade happens? Is there sort of a disappointment that happens?
Yeah, I think for the counterintelligence agents who worked and made this case and spent 10 years in some cases following these people, watching them, and doing an amazing job of collecting evidence for 10 years without these people knowing they were there. That's extraordinary. And then to see them disappear within 11 days, out of reach, without getting that chance to debrief, to find out all the rest of the story. I really want to know what else they collected, because there's got to be more to this.
All right. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
And thanks all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us again tomorrow right here on CBSNews.com. I'm John Dickerson. Have a great day.